So anyway, it was just a really busy weekend, but also I'm so sick of winter.
Yeah, it's been a pretty brutal winter. I'm excited for it to get a little bit warmer out.
Me too. Anyway, thank you so much for seeing me on kind of short notice. I really appreciate it.
Hi, completely understandable. I remember you called me a couple days ago and you said you had something to share with me. Would you like to expand a little bit about what's going on?
I guess. So I just really have no idea what to do. I'm freaking out. So I mentioned a little bit on the phone, but basically it comes down to Alex asked me to move in with him because he sees this as the next step in our relationship. And I don't know if I can do that. I just can't fully conceptualize what exactly is holding me back from moving forward with my life with him. I'm also really scared because this past week, Alex sat me down, expressed how he felt about our relationship and me and where he sees it going. However, he told me he's having a really difficult time going anywhere with this relationship because he feels like I'm the one holding us back from letting anything become more serious. Alex told me he feels like we're at this turning point. His career is established, and so is mine to a certain degree. And he wants to take things to what he sees as the next logical step, which is, I guess, why I'm here, because he asked me to move in, and I kind of just feel like I'm freaking out.
I understand. Moving in with your partner is a big step. And I can see why that would be difficult for you. But why do you think you have so much anxiety personally moving forward with your relationship with him? You guys have been together for quite a while, haven't you?
Yeah, I mean, a really long time. And I don't know. And this is what's part of driving me crazy. You know, if I'm sitting in your office being completely honest with you, I love him. I really do. He's a great guy. Rationally, it makes sense. We've been together a long time. This is the next step. Why don't we just go for it? At the same time, then I feel like things are going really great without that commitment factor. And once that commitment factor is put into place, I'm just so terrified that everything will be changed up and will ruin what was perfectly good before we decided to take this next big, giant step forward.
I understand that you're scared. I'm curious to kind of know what type of things that you're scared of what may happen, but also what do you define commitment as? Do you not see your relationship right now as being a commitment?
I mean, I feel like we're committed. We're in a monogamous relationship with one another. Neither of us would dream of seeing anyone else. But when I'm talking about my fear of commitment, I'm thinking of that commitment of forever. You know, that promise that you're going to be with that one person forever and ever. And I just worry that moving in together is us making that commitment.
And that's definitely a scary thing. It's hard to predict the future and what's going to happen. But in what ways do you see your commitment of long-term changing in sense of dynamics of your relationships? I mean, you've been with him for the past couple of years.
You know, I'm really not sure. The only thing I can go off is from the stories my mom used to tell me about her relationship with my dad and how things were prior to their engagement in comparison to what they became once they got married. You know, when she talks about before they were married and engaged, how great everything was and how it was such a special time in her life and how they were so in love. And then the stories from after their marriage, I mean, you've heard some of them. It was anything but peachy, and I just fear that, you know, maybe if they hadn't gotten married, maybe if they hadn't decided to make that lasting forever commitment, things would have stayed good.
I understand from your experiences how that can have an effect on you. But I'm curious. I haven't heard much about your childhood from you, and I'd be curious to hear kind of more of what that was like for you, what that looked like. Do you mind telling me?
I guess not. So, before my mom passed, when I was really small, I just remember her telling me all of these really great stories about her and my dad and her spending time with him. And anytime she told these stories, she would just light up, you know, reminiscing about the past, how great all of these memories were. But even with that happiness and that light, there always seemed to be some sort of sadness behind it all. My dad didn't become abusive until I was like 10 or so. You know, he got fired from his job. He had a difficult time sustaining the income for our house. At that time, when he got let go, he'd get so upset with my mom because she started working. It was like this pride thing that was stripped from him, and he wasn't any longer the main breadwinner of the house. You know, it was like this loss of that role of being the man or something. I think he felt really inadequate because he couldn't provide for us anymore, and that had been his sole identity. And the fact that my mom was working, I think, made him feel like less. During this time is really when he turned to drinking, and he just spiraled down this path. In my mind, at least, his drinking got out of control so quickly. He lacked that impulse control. He would sometimes act out on emotion, which was often anger, and anyone that got in his way would suffer the consequences of his anger.
That sounds like a very frightening experience for you, and as well as the rest of your family. What do you mean whoever crossed him would suffer the consequences?
Sorry, I'm looking around. This is so hard for me to talk about.
I understand.
You know, it was just one of the hardest things to see my mom, this woman who was just trying to help our family. And instead of thanking her for all the good she was trying to do, he would just take it out on her. My mom always became so tearful when it came to telling stories like this to me. I think she didn't know how much to tell me and how much to leave, hoping I would never know. But then I was in the house. I was experiencing it, and I think she was scared if she didn't talk about it, what that might do to me. But if she did, what that might do to me. So anyway, through my mom's stories and through what I experienced, it became really clear that my dad was abusing her. You know, he would push her, he would shove her, he would hit her. He would push, shove, and hit whoever disagreed with him. It was so scary to see that personality switch.
I can imagine seeing that, how difficult that would be for you and the rest of your family. How would you cope with things like this when you saw what was going on at the home? Did you go upstairs? Were you outside with your friends? When did this all occur, and how did you handle it?
I mean, I really don't know. I think this is one of those things that as a kid, you hear people say all the time, kids are resilient, but I don't know. I just remember at that time really just like trying to physically avoid him. Like, especially when he was drunk, I would just try to be out of the house. You know, I would go outside, I would ride my bike, if I heard him coming, like in the front door, I'd go out the back. It was just, if I knew he was coming home, if I knew he had anything to drink, steer clear.
Well, clearly the relationship you had with your dad and your dad had with your mom has had an impact on your family. I would like for you to share more with me about the relationship you had with your dad and what that looked like exactly, besides just the relationship your dad had with your mother and your family as a whole.
I'm totally fine talking about this stuff. I mean, it's difficult for me, and I don't mean to be rude, I came in to talk about Alex, and I don't really understand what this sort of has to do with that.
I'm just wondering if the relationship you had with your dad throughout your childhood and what you witnessed of your parents' relationship is maybe affecting you in a way of moving forward with your relationship with Alex.
But again, I just really don't see how that relates at all. The connection between my dad and Alex, I mean, my dad was like a monster. And Alex, even though I'm worried and hesitant about moving forward, is the nicest guy I've ever met. Like, I don't see them being related at all. I mean, I get it, you're a professional, and if you insist on talking about it, I can talk about it. I just really think that you're not going to find any connection that you're looking for.
You have a right to your opinion, and I completely hear what you're saying. But if you really don't mind, I really would appreciate maybe if you could share with me about the relationship you had with your dad. if your experiences with him were just toxic, or maybe you even shared some positive and happy moments with him as well. I would love to hear about them both.
Okay, I'll give it a try. When I try to think back about my childhood, when I was really, really young, I think my dad was pretty happy. He was always really busy. He worked for this major consulting company before he got let go, and that was really long days. So even, during that time where I felt like he was happy, he wasn't home much. And even when he was home, it was my 5-year-old self thinking he was happy. I didn't know what happiness meant. I just don't remember him being abusive at that time. So I think, when I think back, if he wasn't abusing us, that must have meant he was happy. But, he would be busy. And even when he was home, it always felt like he was sort of detached. Like, I felt really close to my mom. I felt like I could confide in my mom. I felt like when I was sitting in a room with my mom, she was there. She was sitting with me. With my dad, it was like, if you were sitting in the room with him, sometimes, he's there, but could you really talk to him? Would he hear anything you were saying? He would take part in activities that we did as a family, but he would feel like half a person. His mind was always occupied with work. I will never, ever, ever forget the day my dad got the news about losing his job. Until that moment, I had never seen anything like it. He shut down in this way I had never seen. And so quickly, he started getting angry with every little thing that didn't go his way. When I look back now, I realize that I think depression must have, kicked in hard and fast. Maybe it was there before that and this triggered, I don't know what, but something switched that day and he became really angry and scary. That's when he started turning to alcohol. He'd spend most of his free time and money that he had saved at the bar getting drunk. He'd come home completely wasted, always angry, much angrier than he would be before leaving the house. Before he'd leave the house, he would be angry and you'd try to steer clear of him. But when he got home, it was scary. You didn't try to stay away, you did stay away. You found whatever way you could to avoid him. And, whoever presented in his way, he would just lash out at you. It didn't matter what you were doing. If I was in the kitchen at the time and he was trying to get food out of the fridge and I didn't move in the way that he wanted me to move, he would literally hit me with his belt. I would have bruises all over my legs. I started to live much of my life at home in fear. I would cover up the bruises by wearing really long pants whenever I'd leave my house. It was so horrible. At the time, I didn't realize that life could be any different. That's all I knew. And so now when I look back, I think, God, that was such a horrible time. At the time, I thought, this is life. I didn't realize, this is what physical abuse looks like, and I shouldn't have to wear long pants to hide my bruises. That's just what I did. Thank God I had my mom, thank God I could escape to my room and I could lock the door. But, it's so hard for me to look back on now. What I realized I would worry about all the time then was my mom didn't have that luxury. When I could go lock myself in my room, my mom was just free for the picking, and my dad could pick any fight he wanted with her. If she didn't meet him where he was, and he wanted to be met, either in means of his needs or requests, he would just constantly hit her. Clearly, this wasn't the dad that came to your soccer games and cheered you on, or helped your family make dinner at night so we could all sit down and reflect on the day. I have memories of him telling me he loved me, but I remember even then wondering whether that was true or not, because his actions seemed so far from love to me.
That's a lot. That sounds like really terrifying experience that you went through, both you and your family.
Yeah, I guess you could say that.
I think that must have been really difficult and traumatic for you. How how did you handle all that?
I mean, obviously it wasn't the easiest childhood, that's for sure. But like any kid, I got through it. And I'm an adult now, you know? I feel like dwelling on this stuff and sitting in therapy and talking about it, I feel really like I'm wasting your time. You know, my dad was abusive and he did a lot of horrible things, but there are kids that experience a lot worse. And, you know, I always had a roof over my head. I had a parent, my mom, that really loved me. You know, I made it through, and I really don't have that much of a right to complain. And I found this great guy now, and it's my fault I have these issues with him. Like, I don't know.
Why do you think as an adult you don't have to deal with it anymore?
I just don't see the point in dwelling on things from the past. I think, you know, my childhood was my childhood, and sitting in therapy, talking about it, doesn't do anything for you, and I don't think it really does anything for me. I mean, what good is it going to do for me to think back on something that happened 15 years ago?
I think it's a healing process. I think it's a grieving process. I think it's something that you have to go through during your time in your life in order to move forward. I think if it's something that you choose not to deal with, it's going to come up in other ways.
I just see him as a bad person. You know, I just see my dad as a bad person.
And I'm not saying for you to look at your dad in another light, but I'm just saying I think it could be positive for you to kind of walk through and talk through everything that you've been through and come up with ways of how to cope with it healthfully so it doesn't affect your day-to-day living. But I'm just curious. You told me a lot about negative experiences with your dad. Was there any positive experiences or moments you guys shared together?
I mean, when I was really little, before he lost his job and before he would drink all the time, he would come to some of my ballet and piano recitals. And before that time, when I was much, much younger, I remember him making some sort of an effort to be home at night, tuck me in. You know, I don't. Slowly that stuff started to change. You know, he stopped making the effort to come home at night and tuck me in. He stopped coming to my piano recitals. And then eventually he stopped asking about it. And all of that happened before the drinking. You know, he just kind of distanced himself slowly over time. And there wasn't really one dramatic event that happened to do that. But there was a time and things just slowly began to stop. I think this probably was when things started to get rough at work. You know, maybe he felt less competent or less confident. And again, he was the old-fashioned kind of guy. Like, he defined himself by, you know, his success in his job and his ability to provide for his family. And so I think that fear of losing his job and spending day in and day out at a rough job, it became more of a reality for him, and life at home just got harder.
You've been through a lot, and I'm curious, how have you managed to cope with this throughout your day-to-day life?
I guess I just chose really to not focus on it much. Like you could tell from session, I don't really see the point in talking about it. And if anything is easy for me, it's just easy to pretend like it never really happened. I mean, unless I'm in therapy, there's no reason for me to ever think about this stuff. You know, it's negative experiences. And I can stay pretty busy at work. So especially when it comes to interacting with my coworkers, you know, they have no idea about my past. So when I'm around people that didn't know me in childhood, that didn't know what my experience was like, it's pretty easy for me to pretend it just doesn't exist.
I hear what you're saying, and you choose to neglect the feelings from your past when it comes to working with your coworkers as well. But do you think your suppression of the events of your childhood And your relationship with your dad has had any effect on your relationship with Alex?
No.
But clearly, though you are carrying on with your day-to-day life, in some respects it seems that there are ways you have not properly dealt with the feelings that surround your traumatic experience during your childhood, especially since not only are you avoiding wanting to move forward in your relationship with Alex, but something is hindering you from developing relationships with your male coworkers as well.
I never really thought about it like that. I think I've always just tried to have really minimal influence of males in my life.
Do you think that might be due to the relationship and experiences you had with the one prominent male figure you had in your life?
I mean, maybe. Who knows? How can you ever really know?
Well, I'm curious. How did you see your dad's drinking and inability to handle his anger appropriately affect the relationships between you and the rest of the individuals in your family?
Oh, man. I mean, I saw my mom quickly lose herself. She withdrew not only from the things she enjoyed doing prior to my dad's job loss and his drinking problem, but at that same time, she also started to withdraw socially, not just from her friends, but also her family. My sister and I started to quickly lack the presence of having that strong mother in our life due to her really downward spiral of depression that hit pretty quickly. I quickly became the older female figure to my sister. I tried to protect her from all the terrible things that were going on in our house. My dad and mom's relationship completely fell apart. My mom lived her whole life in constant fear, hearing his footsteps down the hall, or the door opening from the front to hear his arrival home. There was no longer any sort of love presence in our home. It was just a house filled with fear and trying to survive. My mom got to a point of no longer taking care of herself or our family. She took her life when I was 15. It was one of the hardest and most difficult things I've ever experienced.
I can only imagine how difficult that must have been, and I'm very sorry to hear that. It seems like that would have been a really difficult situation to lose your mother at such a young age.
Yeah, it was. That's why I just really try my best to never look back. There's so much tragedy during my childhood. I just do my best to try to enjoy my life now and the positive people that are in it today.
These are pretty negative, impacting moments and relationships you had during your early stages of life. These experiences must have affected the development of relationships with peers and others throughout your life in some way or another.
Well, after this whole thing transpired with the abuse and my mom passing, I counted down the last 3 years until I was 18 that I would become independent and move out of the house. I promised myself that I would never have a toxic relationship like that of my parents. I became really independent, took on the responsible role of caring and protecting my sister. And when I came to forming friendships and trusting others, it was difficult for me to even consider or make a priority. So I guess you can say I have a few good friends from childhood I've stayed in touch with, who know bits and pieces of my past, but when it came to forming new relationships in adulthood, that's been really difficult for me.
Understandably so. I can see how your experiences would make it difficult for you to trust and develop close relationships with others, especially with males. However, after you moved out and went into college, did you have any other relationships with guys besides Alex?
I had a few casual relationships, but I always cut them off before things got too serious. I also have really minimal relationships with the men I work with.
Do you have any idea why that might be?
I don't know. I was just scared because of what I saw when my parents made a commitment to each other, how everything changed, and the last thing I ever want for myself is what my mom had. I know Alex isn't like everyone else, but at the same time, I present a huge fear of involving myself with men in any aspect of my life.
It seems like you have a fear of men. Would it be valid to say that much of that issue is due to the influence and experiences you had with your dad?
Now that we've talked about it, I guess. I've really never thought about it like that.
I really think it's great that you realize and see how the relationship your parent has impacted you and made you self-aware of the types of relationships you do not want as a part of your life. So how have you and Alex managed to be together for 4 years? I would say that's quite a serious commitment in itself, even if it's not a matter of a proposal or marriage, especially since you stated it's difficult for you to get close to a guy. How was that different when it came to interacting and developing a relationship with Alex?
I don't know. Alex was just easy for me in so many ways. We became friends pretty quickly in our intro to psych class freshman year, and we remained friends through senior year. He was always a friend to me when I would talk to him about other guys or my past. He was really easy to talk to and just overall a great person. He never judged me for my past, and he really saw me for me. When senior year came around, he was the one guy I always found myself turning back, being able to talk to and open up to without hesitation. He knew everything when I couldn't tell anyone else. And as time got closer to graduation, he told me how he felt about me and how he thought I may feel moving forward. And essentially, he left it up to me. He always took my emotions into consideration before his. He never wanted me to feel uncomfortable. I was hesitant for sure, but willing to give it a try. I love that he loved and embraced me for all that I was and vice versa. We've been together ever since.
So it seems like you and Alex have a very supportive, positive relationship with one another. So why do you think there's a fear with becoming more serious with him?
I'm just content where things are, and I fear that if we become more serious, there's more commitment involved, more stress, and more pressure.
In what sense do you see more stress and pressure being?
I don't know. If I don't fulfill all of his needs, if I get in his way, what if he loses his job one day or I lose mine? Then what will happen to us?
Do you see any of these thoughts mirroring the conflicts that arose between the relationship you and your mother had with your father? I see some of these connections.
I guess I can see where you make those connections.
I'm just trying to go off from what you've told me in previous sessions, as well about your relationship with Alex, and it seems quite different and a lot more healthier than what your parents' relationship was like. It seems like you both have been great open communicators with one another throughout your relationship about your life, experiences, and how it's shaped one another, and upon that you both have chosen to embrace one another for who you guys are as individuals. And it seems like you both healthfully have chose ways to cope with your stress and learn to not take it out on either one of each other physically and or verbally.
You're right.
I think it's completely understandable to have the fears that you have based off the primary romantic relationship you have to model off from, that of your parents, as well as your own personal relationships you have had with men throughout your life. For example, your dad. But you need to realize that each person is their own. Though experiences do shape who you are, you do have the control to make changes happen and not let things happen as you would hope not.
I definitely see so many amazing qualities in Alex, just with how he has handled past stressful situations with me or other life happenings. How much he shows his love and care for me. I guess I really can't compare him to what I saw in that of my parents. But I just still fear it because I saw it happen to a couple who I once thought was so in love.
Entering and being in a relationship always involves a risk, but you have to come to that in terms of your own. If you're willing to risk and trust that this person is something different than that would have you experienced in your own relationships, or rather witnessed from your parents' relationships, that is something we can definitely explore throughout our next few sessions. And if you would like at some point to involve Alex to come to a session so he can just see what you're working on through a grasp to better understand the complexity and the intensity your past has affected you, it might be a consideration. Completely up to you. Maybe this will give him the opportunity to understand why you're not trying to push him away because you don't want to get too close, but rather the real fears you have that are being held within yourself. I understand and can see why taking the next steps with Alex to move in with him is quite difficult for you. It makes sense, but I think we can definitely work through this and get you to a place of comfort.
I don't know. That might be a good idea to bring him in. He knows I'm coming to therapy. I don't know. I just get nervous about it. I'm not sure if I'd want to do it tomorrow. Most likely in the near future. I don't want to lose him because he's the best thing that's ever happened to me. I really want to be able to work through this.
Well, that's exactly what we'll do here and explore throughout our next several therapy sessions. Unfortunately, we're out of time for today, but I think we made some really great progress. And laying out past experiences and relationships out on the table, and the possibility of how these relationships have affected you in some way or another, and developing some connections amongst them.
I agree. I guess talking to you, I'm starting to see how everything is sort of connected.
Well, thanks for your time, and I appreciate you taking the time to share your experiences with me. I'll see you in 2 weeks.
Thanks.